It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstine Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media industrial, criminal complex. How you doing today, Steve?
It's not always criminal. Sometimes it's criminal. Today it's going to possibly be criminal.
The lines are blurring.
No, all's well down here in Texas. How about you? You're not in New York today, I understand. You're somewhere else. So
I'm in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which, if those of you who've had the pleasure of visiting, is a wonderful stretch of the country that I'm in many deep roots to. So it's always nice, and it's a beautiful weekend. So I look forward to walking the beach.
How's New York been? Still the hellhole it normally is?
Oh, you know it, Steve. We're welcome to have you back for another fun weekend anytime you'd like.
Have you been pushed in front of a subway car anytime soon?
No, my daughter is using Google Maps to chart where there's been subway punchings, though.
Well, see, she's smart. See, she's nervous because she's got a child that has to ride a subway. So
no, that is my child.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. I mean, she's a child. She's nervous, Can't take a normal school bus because you live in, Satan's playground up there.
I know. There we go. We did
a new concert announcement coming up.
Oh yeah, it's still Black Crowes or something.
Oh, did I mention that last time? Yeah, Black Crowes. Yeah, okay. I forgot I mentioned that before.
But I've been driving up and down the East Coast. I'm seeing their billboards for venues all over the place.
Well, I've also got Sammy Hagar coming up too.
Oh wow.
Well, see this one. If you haven't seen this tour sold out instantly because he basically built it as an Eddie Van Halen tribute, more or less.
Oh, and come on.
Well, and he got
or whatever.
No, he did bench his normal guitarist, whose name I can't remember. It's somebody Johnson.
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone on that.
Joe Satriani to fill in to play the Eddie Van Halen role. It's very exciting. Now, Satriani's an elite player.
He's a good player, but he almost feels too technical for Eddie Van Halen.
Well, it's funny you say that because I saw a video. I don't like Howard Stern, but I did watch this little clip of Hagar and Satriani on Stern talking about this tour, and even Satriani could not play the beginning to Mean Streets. He got up there and kind of butchered it, and I thought, wow, because I've tried to play that, I can't come close to it.
But I think that one of the geniuses of Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing, to me, is it, you can make a case for one of the top technical guitar players of all time in rock guitar.
Yeah.
But it always doesn't sound clean or technical, right? You can tell he's doing high-end stuff, but he has a certain sound that's still grounded in a certain amount of distortion and a certain amount of feedback and a certain amount of layers of dirt on top of his playing that to me was his uniqueness of playing.
Well, also the technical aspects of his playing are very unique compared to almost any other guitarist. There's a lot of people who have tried to duplicate it in the years since, including me, but the technical parts of what he does are very, very different. And for example, Eruption, I challenge you to tell me what key Eruption's in. You could maybe claim it's an A major because the first opening chord was an A major fifth, but beyond that, it's just all over the place. But it sounds, because he's just a musical genius, it just sounds great, even though it's just all over the place. And that's not what a guy like Satriani. Yes, if Satriani could go into a lecture on the circle of fifths and all these highly technical things. But Eddie Van Halen's style was unique for sure.
I also maintain that, and I'm wrong on all the financial reasons. So I understand that how wrong I am, but I still believe that I am right. That Van Hagar was the worst thing for Van Halen's career, and was the worst thing for Sammy Hagar's career.
Financially, you're totally wrong.
I know. I admitted that. I said that up front.
I think the reputation of the band dramatically changed, but I would argue it was less about Sammy and more about the changing mindset of Eddie Van Halen, because he's the one who brought in the keyboards on All Wait, and Jump on 1984. And, it wasn't.
But that keyboard part in Jump is legend. It's Hall of Fame.
I agree.
Level.
I love 1984 is my
Riff.
favorite Van Halen album. Okay, I love it. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that, like, the old school Van Halen guys who are older than you and me will not accept anything that's post 1984.
Right. Yes.
Because and that's dumb, because it's all great music. But what I'm saying is the direction they went, certainly lyrically, it was different from, Girl Gone Bad versus Dreams. There's a lyrical difference between, like Roth doing, like, Panama is double entendre about a car,
right.
Versus what Sammy did lyrically, yes, but the musical part is the changing, evolving taste of Eddie Van Halen primarily.
Yeah, and I get that. And I just think Sammy Hagar was positioned to possibly have a career on his own. It is one of the great fascinating what ifs, right?
We had a career. That's
what I'm saying. Like, and there was no reason why that couldn't have still been ascendant.
Yeah, but I mean, Van Halen is one of the legendary rock bands ever. If you had a chance to join it,
yes,
you do it too. Obviously,
but I don't know. But here's where I think it fails because, and maybe I'm giving away my bias, but I fancy myself a decent frontman over the years. I would never follow Diamond Dave. Never. I mean, that's a tough bill.
Yeah. I play guitar. I'm not a front man. I don't have the personality for it. I can sit there and do a decent representation of Eddie Van Halen lead guitar playing. That's it. But Dave's voice wasn't very good. It was even worse live. Well, yeah. But it was the show.
Yeah.
For Dave. And I agree. Like, Sammy runs laps around him from a vocal standpoint easily, but he's not nearly as much of a showman. But Dave has turned into this creepy weirdo.
He hasn't aged very well.
No, he hasn't. And like, he's been doing these videos where have you seen these on his YouTube channel?
I try to keep my Diamond Dave image pristine in my head.
See, it's ruined it for me. Really and honestly, it's like I resent Dave now because I watched a couple of his videos where he's like bashing Wolfie for no reason, and he claimed he wrote Eruption. Like, no, you didn't.
It's just
you did not write Eruption.
It's like a heroin addict. You have to maintain the level of drama and relevance. You have to keep having bigger hits, which is like you got to start going after the core, the kid, the song.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like, listen, I play guitar, dude. I may not be Eddie, but I do know you didn't hum Eruption to Eddie Van Halen. That's ridiculous.
I do wish I had seen that joint tour where they had where it was
Diamond I did see it.
You did?
I saw it. Yeah.
I wish
it was. I'll tell you. So the show I saw was in Dallas, and they rotated who was on first and who closed. And from the show I saw, Sammy opened up, and I gotta say, but when Dave played, Dave lost the crowd a little bit compared to what Sammy did. And it might have been because, like, recency bias, that was when the Sammy stuff was still in the public consciousness more, but Dave kind of lost the crowd a little bit by the end.
Well, he was already in sort of like old man descent by then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you hear that tour is like legendary with a bunch of like,
it didn't even finish, right? I think, I don't know. I'm sure if
I don't know if it didn't finish, but I do know they hated each other as a result of the tour.
At best, they were limping across the finish line.
Eddie Van Halen, and we got to move on, but Eddie Van Halen is one of those guys that definitely my principal musical hero, and I'm glad I never met him. Because I have a feeling he's one of those guys I might have been disappointed in if I had ever met him, Because, I mean, he's a meth head,
Yeah, I think
I don't want to ruin that image,
I feel you, and I have an opportunity sometimes because of the career of my wife, and she has a totally different take on this. But I'm always like, no, I don't. I would rather not meet this person. Can you just not make that happen?
Because you have this image in your head.
Why destroy the myth? I'm not into these things because of how much real people they are necessarily.
No, I just like
he farts too, or whatever.
Yeah, people always wonder, why do you play electric? You don't act like a rock star. It's never been about the lifestyle with me. It's never been about anything. I just love the music, and that's it. And I really want to see it. And I have met some rock stars and stuff when I was a roadie there for a few years in college, and some of them are just creeps. That's all there is to it.
Anyway, so there we go. There's your old guy rock talk for a while.
It's probably worse now for the young
people through the rest of the year, probably. But instead, we're going to talk about $900 millionaires, betting scandals before the proverbial ink on that contract is even dry. we've got Ohtani madness is basically dominating, at least in my view, the kickoff to the 2024 baseball season.
Where to start with this? So
Yeah,
what
sorry, as a
happened?
Dodgers fan, I know this is painful.
Yeah, well, I thought the signing him to $700 million contract was
Oh
painful
yeah,
in the
excuse
first
me,
place.
7, not 9.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened here, for those of you who haven't seen this, is this first of all, the Dodgers and the Padres opened the Major League Baseball regular season a week ago in Korea, and they did 2 games in Korea. And
Really?
yes, this is where this story broke, when they were in Korea. And so
Wow, I
what
missed that part completely.
they opened the season, but spring training wasn't over because they had to give the teams time to adjust back to the United States. And so they played the 2 games. They had 2 games on the official 2024 season record. And then they went back to spring training for another week. And so that's what, so while they were in Korea, this story first broke. And so what happened here is that ESPN got a tip that Shohei Ohtani's translator, and I don't, forgive me if I butcher his name, I think it's Ippei Mizuhara, Ippei Mizuhara. And he's not just Shohei's or Ohtani's translator. He's a very close friend.
He's paid entourage.
But like Ohtani does not speak a word of English. And so he relies on this guy a lot. But again, he's a very, very close friend. So ESPN got a tip that this Mizuhara guy was into it with a bookie for millions of dollars. And so they started looking into it and questioning it and whatnot. And then because Ohtani does not speak English, he was not fully aware what was going on, to the point where the Dodgers owner, Stan Katzman, apparently told the team that a negative story is about to come out. And Ohtani doesn't understand any of it because because his translator wasn't there at this point. And so he's asking about it. So the story got out originally through the translator. And what he said was, I got into it with this bookie, $4.5 million. And now gambling is illegal in the state of California. And so this is one of these off the books criminal. It's a crime. It's a crime in California. And so Mizuhara says he went to Ohtani and said, I'm sorry, boss, this is what happened. And Ohtani said, no problem, I will pay your debts. And he says that they got on the computer together, they logged into Ohtani's account, and they sent a series of 9 different payments to this bookie, Boyer. And that was fine and wonderful, except then Ohtani's attorneys heard this and realized then now Ohtani is linked, 1, to a crime, and then 2, if true, that would also violate baseball's rules. And so then Ohtani's attorneys told ESPN that Mizuhara's story was not accurate and that stand by, they were going to put out another story. And then they put out a story that said Ohtani didn't know anything about it and the money got stolen from his account somehow. Then they put Ohtani in a press conference he completely dimed out his translator and said, this is a crime. Yeah, I'm a victim of a theft. I don't know anything about any of this stuff, and I'm a victim. And that is kind of where we leave it. So the fundamental questions are, who do you believe, Mizuhara or Ohtani? Number one. So Chris, your instant thoughts, then we're going to get into the impact, on the game and Ohtani's, possible, consequences.
I don't see any plausible world where Ohtani wasn't involved here, or that something akin to theft, right? This was not this translator getting a hold of a checkbook or account access and, firing off of, basically stealing right from accounts, right? To pay off his own debt. First of all, why would you do it that way? It's paper trails right there. So, if you at least use a couple of cover your tracks methodologies.
Criminals aren't always smart though, Chris.
I guess, but come on. That's sort of basic. And then 2, just as I say, I find no plausibility that Ohtani was not at least helping his friend pay off the debts. I think he's going to completely skate. It's too valuable for everybody to reputation wash. And the only thing I mean, the only thing here was that they didn't negotiate the planned fall by the translator beforehand, and they have to do it sort of postscript, right? They're coming out here and doing all the cleanup afterwards. They didn't bring in Harvey Keitel to do that previous.
Harvey Keitel. There's an old reference. So I find it very hard to believe fundamentally that a translator could move $4.5 million out of a bank account and not have the principal notice. And this was not all at one time. These are payments over a period of time. Also, is the other thing through last October. So over a couple months. I find it that alone very hard to believe, even if you assume that this Mizuhara guy had access to Ohtani's bank account. $4.5 million. Yeah, go ahead.
So let me see if I get you right here. So you're then sort of taking a jump that says you think that this was there wasn't only on Ohtani's participation in the paying of his friend's debts, but that the translator, the friend, was actually the gambling mule for Ohtani. Okay, so you're not going that far.
No, I don't think. I don't think that there's not been evidence presented that would suggest that. Ohtani addressed that in his presser and said, "I don't gamble ever." Now he could be lying about it, but we've not seen evidence that Ohtani is actually gambling. I think what's the most plausible, to me, when you get these cases, it's like Who Killed Kennedy. You could dream up a whole scenario where there's 50 people around that are managing, John Wilkes, what's the guy's name? The guy who killed Kennedy.
Oh, Oswald.
Yeah. And you could say Oswald was, a mule for the Cubans or the Russians or the mob and all this. But sometimes, if you've ever heard the term Overton window, there's like a realm of reasonable discussion. What's most reasonable is that Oswald happened to be a psychopath and killed the president, because he was a psychopath. And so in that same vein here, what's more reasonable, that Ohtani's going to risk a $700 million contract to bet to play some bets with some creepy California bookie, or that his translator is a gambling addict who then went to his friend and said, "Boss, you got to help me." And Ohtani, because he's a dumb athlete, said, "Sure, I'll help you. We'll work it out later. Let's get you out of trouble here. Let's send the money." At the end, and had no thought whatsoever to the consequences of it, because he's not a lawyer and he's a dumb athlete. That's to me, the most reasonable, plausible story is that. And now they're trying to cover it up later when they realize, their attorneys wait a minute, this is wrong. And so then let's hang the translator.
We've gone outside of the order of operations here about how we wanted to get this out, because we knew it was going to come out.
Because if you had thought about it, what you could have done to make it legal is say, I'm going to give you supplemental pay here for some additional duties for a year, and feed you this money in a way that disconnects me from the gambling. You could have done that, and they didn't.
Or the next layer of sort of like, gating protections would have been like, oh, this could go south on us. Listen, I bailed you out. I gave you the $4 million. You got to take a fall, right? You got to come out, and, you got to come out and say, yeah, I stole, like before, not this like, oh, he helped me solve these problems, whatever. They should have just set him up as, that should have been a completely set up fall guy, which, quite frankly, so what's he do? He's not allowed in the United States or whatever. Like in the end, his fall's not going to be that steep. And, he got his band, he didn't get his legs broken, and he probably gets some future payoff anyway, but that should have all been coordinated.
Yeah, I mean, he lost a cushy celebrity job, but I mean, you did it to yourself.
Yeah, don't get into millions of dollars of gambling debt.
Yeah, and so you just have to stop and think for a minute. What is the most reasonable scenario here? Because that's probably the truth. What is most reasonable and realistic? And the most reasonable, realistic story is what you said and what I was agreeing with, which is he got himself in trouble. He went to his friend. His friend bailed him out. Neither one of them had, have two brain cells when it comes to...
And $4 million is nothing to Ohtani. So we're also not talking about like a big financial burden.
Correct. For you and I, we don't have $4 million. It would be a massive, massive problem. For
even Ohtani, a guy at the end of a baseball's bench.
Yeah, right. So I think that's and also the story that Mizuhara told the media was detailed and realistic and seemed realistic, had a ring of truth to it. No, that's not evidence, but that's just me, looking at after a lot of years of seeing a lot of cases, it seemed reasonable. Whereas Ohtani's story had no details except to say, I didn't know about any of this, and he stole money from me. It didn't say how he stole money. It didn't say why Mizuhara had how he possibly had access to his bank account when he was just a translator and not a financial advisor or anything like that. I don't know about you, but my friends don't have my access code to my bank account.
No. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I'm sitting on the couch in the middle of the Overton window here for sure. I think that's probably what's going on. But what happens, it's very interesting, and we will be following along what happens to Ohtani here and vis-a-vis his contract and baseball rules, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of story to come on this, but we cannot lose sight of the fact also that this is maybe the biggest story so far, maybe just because of the level of the player and the level of his contract, but we're starting to see versions of these stories and pop up on the regular, and it's almost like somewhat the sort of garden is blooming in terms of what you can expect on a kind of drip of these kind of scandals. There's just too much surface area for these things to go awry. And this one is interesting to me because California is not a legal betting state. What if he was in a legal betting state?
But there's still you still have to have a license to do this, and some bookie on the side.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But if he was in a state where he just had a FanDuel account, and the incongruity between
but you're not going to get in
rules.
But you're not going to get in trouble for $4.5 million in a FanDuel.
No, they're going to have their own limits, right?
Right. And you're also not going to let you place a bet where that you haven't posted the money either.
Yeah. But it is interesting because no one knows. My point is, no one knows the maze, right?
Right.
This isn't a defense of even the translator. I'm just saying we're going to get these stories will be bi-weekly because this is it. Things will get ensnared in this confusion, whether it's a player I didn't know I could bet from the locker room, whether it's, we'll talk about the story with Jontay Porter in a second, where or something that's like happening at Temple, where you start to see actual, outcomes of the games. Are they in jeopardy? Are they tarnished? So this is
that's the interesting part of the story. And before we go to that aspect of it, just for the Ohtani's future. So remember that Major League Baseball has a very, very strict prohibition against betting. And famously, for those of you who remember, Pete Rose was banned for betting on baseball, and he's still banned, and they've kept him out of the Hall of Fame, even though he's certainly inarguably at the time, was the greatest pure hitter in baseball history. At the time he was run out of baseball. And so fast forwarding to the worst case scenario for Ohtani, the worst case scenario would be, again, at the edge of the Overton window, that he's the front for, he's the gambling addict and this Mizuhara guy is doing it. And Ohtani could theoretically, if that was the circumstance, just either Chris or I think it is, but if it was, then they could ban Ohtani from baseball and erase the $700 million contract. That's the worst. In a realistic scenario, if what we think happened, which is that Ohtani's bailing his friend out, proves true, you could see Ohtani get suspended for some period of time.
Like 30 games? What do you think?
Something, yeah, I can pick a number, but some period of time like that. Because obviously I think it's in the best interest of baseball to cover it up as much as possible. He is the biggest star, in spite of the fact that he is not an English-speaking player. He is the biggest star in baseball by far. And he is the most unique talent in baseball in 100 years since Babe Ruth. And so baseball, and he has the largest contract in certainly American sports history. I wouldn't swear that there's some soccer player out there that doesn't have this big contract, but
it's at the top.
Right. Certainly at the top of all American sports. Baseball wants him to succeed. And so I think they will do everything they can to help steer him toward a conclusion that minimizes the damage. But if the Mizuhara stole the money theory just is not credible, then Ohtani is going to get suspended for some period of time. Well, and he also might face criminal charges in California.
You could even see a world where we all buy the stolen money, but you still have Ohtani's name on stuff. And I could even see some disciplinary slap on the wrist from baseball, even at the end of the most beneficial to Ohtani way this plays out. I think he still pays some price.
Well, and you should, because think about this, so your employee comes to you and says, I'm in bed with some criminal enterprise gambler. And your first thought was, let's just pay the criminal enterprise off. No, the first step would be to maybe go to management, go to the police,
or even your agent or accountant,
your attorneys or somebody, right? Anybody. Don't just go, let's just go wait. Let me fire up the MacBook and, let's just pay him. That's not a reasonable response. And he probably does deserve some level of punishment for this, in spite of what the Dodgers would want.
A little quick aside, I'm in a book and a movie club where the idea is you read the book and then you watch the movie adaptation of it and you discuss. And there's this book, Ed Burns, who's a very famous crime writer. And it was a book about a kidnapping and ransom and all this. But then the great Japanese filmmaker Kurosawa, Seven Samurai, blah, blah, blah. He made a version of the movie in the 60s called High Low. And so this was all kind of, we were reading and watching this as this all went down in the background. And so the Japanese version of the book is actually set in the US, but he made this version set in Japan. And it was such a funny parallel to this. So if you want, because of the like begging your rich friend to bail you out, and, because basically the whole point of it is the kidnappers kidnap they get the chauffeur's kid, not the rich guy's kid. And then, and then the rich guy has to decide whether he's going to bankrupt himself to save this kid. That's the moral dilemma. So it was all playing out in the background, and then watching the Kurosawa movie. So it was, sort of Japanese cultural at the same time. So if you want to go nerd out, I would suggest watching the movie High Low.
Well, and also, that's interesting. Also, it's like, remember, like Ohtani doesn't have $700 million in the bank himself.
Not
of
yet.
Course. Yeah. Not yet. Because all his money's deferred for 20 years. And so, I assume he can suck up $4.5 million without many problems, but at some point it would be a problem for him.
Yeah, for sure. So let's jump. So, we could probably move on pretty soon, but it's just we're gonna have a version of these stories every time we do one of these shows, and there'll be versions of these gambling sports crossover stories in the sports news cycle regularly.
Well, this is why I wanted to do the story, which is this is the impact of all these sports networks getting so in bed with gambling. And I'm not making a moral judgment against it or anything. Don't misunderstand me. If you want to gamble, go gamble. It's not, it's fine with me. But when you have sports for decades kept a clear, line of demarcation between the leagues themselves and gambling, and that line has been completely erased at this point. With sponsorships, teams in Las Vegas. The NFL, is in bed with FanDuel and DraftKings and all of it, as are all of the leagues. And so you're going to have more in with the advent of gambling in many states. You're going to have, like you said, many more stories like this. And so the question becomes what to do. What the NFL has done is they've come down very hard on these players. If you've noticed, there have been many players suspended for gambling in the NFL or disciplined in some fashion for gambling. It hasn't happened so much in baseball yet, but it will. And we're going to see more and more of this, because what is the rule? Can Shohei Ohtani bet on the over and under on, how many points LeBron James has in a basketball game? It's not the NBA. It's not, Major League Baseball. Is that okay? Is it not okay? So those are the questions that are going to become far more prevalent. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah. And so if we look, there's a couple, this sort of like drip of stories. So one is this Jontay Porter, Toronto Raptors, who's basically because people listen to the chatter, right? There's still crime investigations. There's still, all kinds of ways people know what's going on in the gambling world, right? So what happened was some unders on Jontay Porter hit, and they got hit by sharp money. So people know how money moves, right, on these in these high end gambling worlds. and it's been monitored for decades when it was legal, illegal, whatever. So they saw a bunch of money move, and then on multiple games in a short amount of time, Jontay Parker's basically stubbing a toenail in the first quarter, and then thus guaranteeing whatever unders were bet on that. And so that kind of on the field, how do they start to police that is going to be super interesting, because these things are just too easy, to some degree, right? And so the ones that are making the most legal money of this are going to have to spend a good amount of their own fortune on some kind of legitimacy backstops here.
Yeah, and let me just say that any player, because the only way Jontay Porter would do that is if somebody in the industry is paying him to do that. He's not betting on himself a huge amount of money to go under, And so somebody's handing him money to take a dive. And so how much money would it take for a player to endanger his top 0.0001% career in income? Because basketball players are all making seven figures. The smart thing to do would be to extend that seven-figure income as many years as you can and not risk it on illegal payments. But, some people are dumb. That is going to become more and more prevalent. You've always heard stories of this, but it's always like Tony Soprano, type person is, and it'll be very rare and clearly, really bad stuff. But in the advent of legal gambling like this, I think there's more and more of an opportunity. And we don't know if Jontay Porter really did this or didn't do this. It just looks really bad. And it invites questioning where there didn't have to be questions before. That's my thought.
This is interesting too, because it was his name, Charlie Booker. What's the guy's name? The NCAA head honcho?
Oh,
Charlie Baker. I was just looking at.
I think it's Baker.
Yeah.
It's
now,
Charlie Baker.
Charlie
It's
Baker.
Charlie Baker. Yeah.
He's now pushing. So now you start to see some of these leagues, I'm calling them a league. Push back, or like, how do we put the genie back in the bottle? Right? Can we put like at least one leg of the genie back in the bottle? And what he wants to do, which is connected to the story, is he wants to ban prop bets for NCAA games, because that is the easiest, which the Jontay Porter story sort of shows. That's the easiest thing for an individual player to affect, right? You can even tank and your team still wins, right? It's hard but individual prop bets, you can get directly to a player, and those can hit or not hit depending on the actions of those player. And so Charlie Baker is saying, hey, can we at least get this, basically?
Well, at least they drew a line somewhere, right? But by the way, before I forget, now I'm not trying to go backwards here, but the best Shohei Ohtani story, if you want to read it, we'll put it in the notes, is Shohei Ohtani, his interpreter and wire transfers, a timeline by Tisha Thompson, dated March 22nd. And then the story that relates to the Charlie Baker thing that Chris is talking about, if I can flip to it here, this is on The Athletic.
It's a David Ubin.
Yeah, March 27th, NCAA President Charlie Baker wants to ban prop bets on college football. I just think it's funny because you're going to have all manner of NIL compensation going around back and forth, to the point where we saw another story that says schools are now bringing in an NIL general manager, which is basically, what's it going to take to buy this high school player is what that means. And we need to manage the money and interact with the collectives at each university. And all of that's totally fine. But now we're going to worry about prop bets. I don't even have a great analogy for it. It's a problem, but the much bigger issue here is that you've legalized corruption in recruiting players. And now you're going to worry about a prop bet, which that's not going to be the prop bet corruption is possible. See Jontay Porter potentially, maybe, allegedly, but that's going to be few and far between. To me, the much bigger problem in college sports is that it's now legal for schools to buy high school kids. I think it's funny that this is a big problem and the other isn't. But in terms of the prop bet thing, he's right. I understand the point. The point isn't that you and I shouldn't be allowed to go bet on Syracuse to, score more than 20 points or whatever, because we're just consumers. The point is, we don't want the game to be corrupted because and with players to be bribed to tank because of it. And so I understand that, but I think there's a much bigger problem that we're ignoring. And maybe that may be a bit of a non sequitur, but that's the first thing that went through my head.
No, yeah, right. It's like sticking your
it's a non sequitur.
Yeah, but it's also, but to your point, is like Charlie Baker's got a mountain of problems, right? Like, so,
and this
stopping
is the
one boulder down the mountain is, kind of, and what ultimately is going to destroy the integrity of the game, right? Like being able to isolate your occasional gambling scandals or having,
that's my
the most free, the largest free agency system in American sports.
That's my point. It's like, okay, yeah, sure. We want to ban prop bets because we want to guard against it, but that is a problem that's few and far between. It's a relatively small problem. Not everybody out there is going to, I'm going to drop 3 passes in a football game to keep the under because somebody paid me $20,000 to do it when I got paid by Nike $500,000 to transfer from Alabama to Clemson. That's the much bigger problem. And the guy is not seeing the forest through the trees if he thinks that this is the biggest problem.
No. And also it's going to never happen. It's also like, give me things that will never happen for 500, Alex.
I mean, it'll be out there somewhere. Maybe, you might find 1 in 1,000, or
no, I'm saying you're not going to get these legal sports things to, I think it's going to be hard to motivate anyone to ban prop bets in college sports.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's
so it's like, also you can mouthpiece that all you want, but it's not going to happen.
Why would they? And there's no obligation for them to do that. DraftKings isn't doing anything illegal here. They're not, they're offering a service and it's legal and that's it. No, it's not. He can say all he wants, and he can advocate. Certainly he can, lobby if he wants to and try to, lobby Congress or lobby individual states or something, but the genie's out of the barn now with it. It's not going to happen. I think he's got much bigger problems. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, we'll be doing versions of this story for months and months and months.
What do you think's going to happen to Ohtani? What's a prediction?
I think he skates. I think he skates with a coordinated slap on the wrist, which may include games and, and probably a hefty fine or something. But I think they will negotiate the settlement. Let's call it that settlement will be enacted. And by the time he is both hitting and pitching, which looks like the 2025 season.
Yeah.
This will all be forgotten.
That's what I was going to say is, the Dodgers and or his representatives will negotiate something that does not impact his ability to pitch next year. So whatever happens, this is kind of a throwaway year anyway, a little bit, because he's just DHing. The Dodgers have probably the most talented offense in baseball realistically now. They could lose him and be fine for a while. They don't want to lose him at the beginning of the season because, the fans are excited and all that. So they let this investigation play out a little bit, suspend him for a couple months. It's exactly like a DL stint. Comes back, it's all forgotten. Yeah, I agree. And they fired this, by the way, the Dodgers. Mitsuhara was a Dodgers employee and they fired him, and Ohtani has some other translator for him now. And so Mitsuhara is going to be on his own and hung out to dry.
I'm going to go against type here a little bit, but you think for a $700 million contract, you could learn a few words of English?
Why is that against type? That's not necessarily
because I'm generally, a pluralist and all that. But I mean, just like, come on, guy.
Yes, you should. Yes, you are in America. You're one of the very highest paid people in this country, courtesy of classic American sport. Yes, learn a few words of English. Correct. You should. Yeah, and I bet you he knows.
Yeah, right.
He knows a few words of English. He just doesn't want to let on.
Yeah, no. All right, there you go. There's my going against stereotype. You can't pin me in.
Yeah, now you're going to vote for the Republican for president.
Probably not. So, Steve, no. What's going on so you're probably in all kinds of draft prep, I assume.
Yes.
Okay, so you can, with the caveat that we have probably at least one more show, I would guess, before the draft, if I'm just looking at my mental calendar. Where are you right now on who they should take it to?
Washington?
Yeah, you prepared to put a name down?
my Hogstye brethren would be upset if I did, but
Well, then do a tease. Do a tease. If you want to find out who Steve is, his current number two is.
So I do not think Drake May is worth the number 2 pick. I'll say that.
All right, there you go.
I watched his film. I studied his film. He's got a lot of inconsistencies in his game. He's, I think the dream of Drake May is different than the reality of Drake May. So I don't think they're going to go May. I know apparently I'm told that the Twitterverse is there's a Jaden Daniels factor, there's a Jaden Daniels click and there's a Drake May click apparently. And I don't pay any attention to it anymore, but I'm on of that group. I'm on team Jaden Daniels, who's also not perfect, but he is a much better prospect than Drake May. That's what I think.
And it's important to keep in mind about all these guys that we are in the season of looking for imperfections. That's the game right now, is finding all the faults. So everyone's gonna have bloody noses by draft day.
Since we have a few extra minutes here, I'm gonna raise ad hoc another story here because we can't talk football for 20 minutes. The other story is I sent you a link to it, Chris. There is a sports link to the P Diddy story.
Oh, what, the basketball player?
Yes. So apparently there's a Syracuse basketball player who, I saw this in Fox News, former Syracuse basketball player, alleged drug mule for Sean Diddy Combs, arrested on drug charges by Ryan Morick on the 28th of March. We all seen the Sean Diddy Combs story that he is rapidly going south. Well, apparently there's a random white basketball player who's involved in this, who this story claims was a drug mule for Combs, meaning he's the guy who went out and bought the drugs, bought them in, or the illegal substances, whatever they are, on behalf of allegedly Sean Combs and his people. The only connection to sports on this is that he was an ex-Syracuse basketball player, not an NBA player. So he doesn't have independent money like that. He's well before NIL also, I think. So there's a sports story there, sort of. And in terms of P. Diddy, he's going down one way or the other.
Oh, yeah. I think the chips have fallen. One interesting thing is one of the women who have filed one of the civil suits was also a Syracuse student. So there is some multi-layer connection here between, I'm not talking about Syracuse University administration, but there's at least 2 coincidences that connect students at Syracuse, this basketball player and one of the victims. And I think even the victim alleges that it happened on the Syracuse campus, or they met on the Syracuse campus, or so the University of Syracuse has actually popped up a number of times in this story.
Where is Syracuse in New York?
It's way upstate, so it's pretty close to Canada.
That's what I thought, so it's not in Manhattan, because I think P. Diddy is from somewhere in one of the 5 boroughs.
Yeah, he's from New York City, but no, it's way upstate.
So my point is, this is not a case of like some in Manhattan or near the New York City greater metropolitan area university getting corrupted, by, some rap/crime mogul. This is kind of a random connection, I think. And I don't think it has anything. None of this alleges that Syracuse University had anything.
No. It's just like students have popped up now twice, but you do wonder, is there a connection between this woman and this basketball player? Like, I'm not saying, was there introduction through one of them? I mean,
is it so hard to believe?
Yeah. So you have 2 students around the same age who were involved young people, maybe because they're not all, could be after their time there, but there was a social connection between that. And he was not a basketball player of note. I think he even transferred out of Syracuse, right? And finished his career in D3 or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And listen, I mean, this goes back to what I've always said is these recruited athletes are not always the sharpest knives in the drawer here. And they're not, if for those of you who don't understand this, universities waive most of their recruiting standards for recruited at D1 athletes. And it depends on university and all of that. But my guess is that, what was his name? Brendan. I lost the name. Brendan, whatever his name is, Brendan, probably isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer himself. What kind of career did he have after basketball ended? And how did he fall into being a drug mule for a rap mule? I mean, it's like, I think it's straight out of a bad 1 hour CSI episode.
Yeah. And I imagine the Syracuse basketball player is going to basically is out there to be a fall guy, probably. That's it's always already been part of his role.
Yeah. Brendan Paul is his name. And I'd never heard of him, but before this story. So, we will keep watching this and see whether Brendan, a random guy with bad hair, Brendan Paul, brings around the downfall of one of the biggest rap moguls in the genre.
News at 11, but that another story that we will not go away. All right. So if you tune into the Hogsty, if you want to find out the May choice of Steve, but he withholds the right to change his mind over the next couple of weeks, along with everybody else in the football universe.
Well, yeah, we're going through all the draft, position groups and whatnot slowly on the show. And I usually do quarterback last to give me more of a chance to get through all the film. So the reason I was being vague is I haven't published the results yet, and I'm not through them all yet.
Well,
so
there you
somebody
go.
Random person may impress me. Who knows?
All right. And here on It's Just Business, we will see you in 2 weeks.